Greetings gamers, I'm Mark.
And I'm Manuel.
And welcome to Tabletop Throwdown. Today we are covering a war transformed, World War I on the Doggerland front. Manuel, I am captivated by this weird war setting. What makes the lore so unique?
Well, the Great War meets the horrors of forgotten folklore in this occult skirmish miniatures war game by F. Slater, Silburn, and D. Martinos. Available now from Osprey Publishing, the book is loaded with background lore, rules, and amazing artwork.
Yes, and A War Transformed contains folklore, occult, and turn-of-the-century metaphysical influences. For example, different units have astrological attributions, witches can summon manifestations, and tarot cards can optionally be used to track spells and rituals.
And World War I was quite ghastly enough without the intervention of horned god rituals.
So today we have with us Mr. Bob Spickard, who is both a craftsman jeweler and military history collector. Bob, tell us what items and weapons made the Great War so unique in its time, and what are some of the items that you brought to share with our audience today?
Well, after the initial battles, when it was discovered that there wasn't going to be a Waterloo with masses of armies rushing at each other, the armies had to retreat into the earth like their caveman ancestors. So they were fought in the middle of the night with sticks and stones, only the stones exploded. This is a 1915 German Kugelgrenade. It's activated by friction pull detonator and had a 5-second delay. It's heavy cast iron, and it's a fragmentation, what we call a defensive grenade. The British, after they advanced past the jam tin bombs, which were, a jam tin packed with explosive and a fuse, came up with their own Mills bomb, which lasted them through 2 wars and is quite effective. In fact, one had to be careful because the British were used a high explosive in it, and you couldn't throw it past its blast radius of fragmentations. The Germans also had an offensive grenade, which are, the standard stick grenade that you have seen in all the movies there. This is a thin-skinned metal grenade designed that you unscrew the cap, you have another friction igniter, you pull that, you have 5 seconds to throw it as far as possible, and German doctrine was you throw this while you're advancing so you could go into your enemy positions and take them over after the blast. The French also came up with their version of it, an offensive one. Now you have to remember, before the war, everybody, they thought wars were going to be short and you wouldn't need so many things. But, of course, once you start dealing with hundreds of thousands of men and a continuous war, you need literally millions of these, of all kinds. This one, if you look closely, the thin sheet metal is made out of a sign from one of their scrap drives. This also has a mousetrap, what they call a mousetrap type detonator, which is what we adapted for our grenades, rather than the British style or the German detonator style. Now, we also have, there were all sorts of innovations during the war. Oh, and I forgot, of course, then, the charming German turtle grenade. The thing about grenades is you want to throw them, but you don't want to have enough time for your adversary to pick them up and give them back to you. So the Germans, optimally you want a grenade that would explode on contact. So the Germans came up with the model 1915 grenade, which is a discus grenade. This has a detonator here. You pull your pin and you have 5 little nubbins here which have detonators in them, and then you throw it like a big skipping stone.
Yeah.
And hopefully it'll hit something hard and go off. So
So, question. You mentioned the offensive grenades, throwing them as you're advancing towards the trench. The defensive grenades were used how? Just literally the opposite way? As soldiers were coming up, you would toss them and then duck back down? Or
Yes, and then, or if you get into the trenches, you come up to a traverse or an area right there around the corner, pull the pin, chuck it around the corner to disturb anybody that's there.
give them a warm welcome.
Yes. Now, also, because many of these battles, in between the large battles, everybody, the British called it an offensive spirit, which meant your troops would go out in the middle of the night in the no man's land between the masses of barbed wire and engage in what were essentially gang fights, which you would do at close quarters, knife, sharpened entrenching tool that we have.
That is a brutally sharp knife.
Or you want to increase your firepower. Standard pistols, have 7, 8 rounds. This is a German innovation. It's called a Trommel magazine, a drum magazine. It holds 32 rounds. It's a wind-up magazine. They're a bear to load. And they're made by toy makers. Because those are the people in Germany that knew how to make wind-up mechanisms. You also have a shoulder stock, and this is an artillery Luger, which is actually pre-war, but with additions could serve throughout the war, and as a an increased firepower. By the end of the war, they had carried this a bit further and had come up with the submachine gun and a pistol caliber on both sides. The American ones didn't see use, but they saw use plenty in the Thompson submachine gun, designed for trench warfare. It was called a trench broom. Saw plenty of use in Chicago later years.
Manuel, how heavy is that gun? Tell us.
This is quite heavy, actually. It's hefty, but I think a good chunk of that is the stock, because it is actually a solid wooden stock. As with most military weapons, as you pointed out with the grenade, they had to use whatever materials they had available in quantity. So they made things out of wood or leather or whatever else was commonly available. But it has quite a bit of heft to it. It's quite an amazing piece and in really excellent condition. Kudos, this is very nice.
Is this from your collection?
Yes, yeah. It's quite accurate. It has a sight that is, I forget how many meters it's sighted out to, which is rather optimistic. However, under 100 meters, yeah, you can place rounds in a 4-inch.
So you fired this?
Oh yes. They're no fun unless you use them.
Let's talk about the mask you took off and the canister that holds the mask. Let's talk a little bit about the gas warfare.
Now, I might as well take this out. That is an original World War I German container. This is a reproduction mask that I made. And on that note, if you run into a World War I mask, this was the first thing that I was taught when I bought my first World War I artifacts back in the 1960s. You never try on a World War I gas mask, because mustard gas is forever. And I can guarantee you that if you show up at the EUR with mustard gas burns, Homeland Security will not be far behind.
It's a way to gather some attention, yes.
Well, that's a really interesting anecdote, because I have read stories over the years, and this used to be prevalent more back in the 50s and 60s after both world wars were over. But even into the 60s and 70s, in the Belgian countryside and the French countryside, farmers plowing their fields would sometimes turn up pockets of mustard gas left over from the Great War and would wind up in hospital with burns and such. The stuff is dangerous. Please take Bob's advice to heart. He is the expert on this stuff. If you do encounter any genuine World War I artifact, particularly of the gas mask variety, be aware that they may have been used, and if they were used, they may have traces of this material on them. Thank you very much for pointing that out, Bob.
And that also goes for ordnance. I didn't bring any artillery shells here and stuff, but many soldiers brought back souvenirs that perhaps they might have taken the detonator out of the grenade, or they might have taken something like that, but they're still full of explosive. And the military makes things that last. And years back, I was invited to a museum to help go through some of their weapons, And one of the things they wished me to do was go out to what they called the ugly room, where people had donated stuff and it hadn't really been sorted through and cataloged, and they had a number of artillery shells, and they wanted me to check them and make sure that there was nothing that could cause unpleasantness in there. I am not an EOD expert, but I do know when to look at something and call out for a real expert.
Gotcha, gotcha. Excellent advice. So I am fascinated by this helmet here, Bob. Can you tell us a little bit about this guy?
This right here is a German Stahlhelm. I had it camouflaged underneath there, which is very late war. And more than likely you saw them with the sandbag covers here to keep from reflecting things. It is heavy, as you would want it. They are not designed, helmets are not designed to stop bullets. What they are designed is to stop overhead shrapnel balls. Artillery shells then, the shrapnel acted like a large shotgun shell. It would go up, it would come down, the bursting charge would blow it, the cap off, and all of these round balls, about ½ inch in diameter, would come out and rain down upon the troops there. This will stop shrapnel balls and other small shrapnel and everything. They're not too bad to wear. They have the funny thing is, if you look at the styles, the Germans copied the 15th century Sallet, the German Sallet helmet. The British copied their 16th century pikeman's helmet. So there was nationalism even in the body armor. The thing is because your skirt and the back goes down, they're hard to look up with modern American helmets. When they adapted a helmet, which they called the Fritz there, made a cutout so that you could look up better.
I noticed that this Stahlhelm looks a lot like the World War II variant, so they didn't change a whole lot. This design was so effective, they apparently kept it in use for quite a while.
It is. And what everybody calls the Frankenstein Bolts, this was to supplement a secondary armor plate for originally machine gunners and people that were up in the trenches at night. You'd have people on watch there that they'd have to stand up where they're above the parapets there, and this would give additional protection from random rounds coming across the battlefield. It also there was a set of very heavy body armor that went down there, but it was just it was so heavy, while it was effective, it was so heavy you really couldn't move in it very fast or very far, and it used up too many essential materials. So but they kept on their little ventilation holes through there, but still it was for supplemental armor.
Gotcha. Well, the combatants always had economy in mind with all those hundreds of thousands of men on the field. It got very costly to equip them. Let's have a look at that knife there.
This is not particularly a bayonet, although they did make one. This is an American bolo, and it's for cutting firewood, for many uses around the camp there. Not necessarily at close combat, but it does work very well for close combat. This particular one probably had an oxidized dark blade, but somebody in the last 100 years decided they wanted a shiny blade and they polished it off. But you would see these common among American troops being carried. I probably should have brought a selection of close combat knives. I have every soldier, besides their bayonet, like to have a knife. Oh, now they're pocket knives for just cutting up food and things like that, but they're also close combat knives, and this is our holdover from the old days where you didn't go at it with guns, you went at it with fists and cold steel, and in the middle of the night, a gun is loud, a knife is not.
Gotcha, gotcha. And looking at this bayonet here, I noticed these serrations on it, these really wicked looking serrations. What was the purpose of that?
Well, okay. Now, if anybody's read I'll Quiet in the Western Front, one of the scenes they have is one of the new guys comes up, and they have bayonets with these. These are actually pioneer bayonets. These are made for cutting sawwood. You would not use this in battle, and if you were caught carrying it into battle, they would probably do you to death in a very unpleasant manner. But this particular one, I have just because I got a good deal on it, and I always wanted a sawtooth bayonet because they are rather rare. I have one. Generally, what they did is later in the war, when they stopped using wood out there in the no man's land and started using pigtails, which I should have brought one of those too. But they ground them all off.
Oh.
So an actual long one is quite valuable in the collector's realm, because this bayonet actually started out, if maybe it's time to hand me the rifle.
Sure.
With being that long right there, and essentially turning your rifle into a pike, where we go back to the notion at the beginning of the war that it was going to be a big massive battle like Waterloo, with the big armies running at each other, and they'd fire a couple of rounds and then they'd have at it with bayonets.
Right.
Well, yeah.
This is very fascinating to me because I myself have an interest in firearms, and I collect some firearms myself. And what's amazing about this particular weapon, and I'm having a hard time even getting it on screen, is how enormously long this is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With the bayonet affixed, even without the bayonet, this is already a quite long rifle by modern standards.
Right.
If you carry, say, a modern AR-15 or something of that style, it's easily at least a foot shorter than this. An AR-15 might be all of about this long or so in its current M4 configuration. So the rifles of the era were very long, full-size, full-power cartridges. You'll notice this very long bolt here with the long, full-size cartridge of the day, typically a 30 caliber in that era, or 7.62 millimeters, depending on which side of the Atlantic you were from. But then on top of that, of this huge, long rifle, you have this bayonet out at the end. And I don't think this is even on frame here, but it's amazingly long. This is an amazingly long and amazingly heavy and hefty weapon. So, Bob, let's hear a little bit more about this guy.
This is the standard German infantry rifle of the First World War, a Gewehr 98, which meant it was just a rifle from 1898. It is in the 8mm Mauser, which we copied and changed around to turn into our 30-06 caliber. It is a 5-shot magazine. It loads from the top with a stripper clip. You can see the bolt right there, which I'm going to close. This particular one was made in 1904 and comes to me via Turkey. The Germans gave a lot of these to Turkey, or sold them, because Turkey was the ally of the Germans. And later in the 1980s, it was sold as surplus. It has the original long roller coaster sight, which is desirable. And this bayonet here, this is the same model, only shortened. Mm-hmm. And this bayonet comes from Turkey too, from some of the surplus from the 1980s. The Turks kept it in service through World War II and shortened it to make it much more handy, because as you say, that's a long thing to have. That's a long thing to tote around. And since the odds that you're actually going to get into close combat with the opposing forces is rather slim, you know, you could have it a bit shorter. Our long bayonets from the First World War were shortened in the Second World War to go on the Garand rifles. But as I said, most of the combatants of World War I used a bolt-action rifle. They held anywhere from 3 rounds to 10 rounds. The British Enfields held 10 rounds, but the magazines, while you could take them out, generally they were left in place and they were replenished by stripper clips.
Put this over here. Mark, if you'll go ahead and get the trenching tool out.
Yeah.
Frequently, you'll see reference in contemporary literature or novels of the time of, the entrenching tool being used for things rather than digging holes. This is, if you look at it and you sharpen the edges there, this makes a very effective close combat tool. This particular one is Russian, made in 1915. However, the Germans used much Russian equipment that they captured during some of the early battles there, just because all of the armies had expanded so rapidly that it was hard to equip your men with all of this stuff, especially as some of the battles there, what happens is, your men get knocked off and are captured, and that equipment is lost.
Yeah.
So whatever you capture from, and a shovel is a shovel, whether it's Russian made or German, or French or anything like that. But this is standard equipment for every soldier, and it can do double duty, dig a hole with it, sharpen the edge, and go into nighttime battle with it, because it will make a brutal battle axe.
I could see that it's fairly hefty. The steel of it is fairly hefty. The wood is very strong. I could see this being a very brutal close combat weapon in a trench in the dark. It'd be certainly better than nothing.
Dig a hole or permanently put someone in one.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
So guys, this game is heavily steeped in folk horror, turn-of-the-century magical belief systems, lodges, the publication and mass distribution of the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot deck at the time. The lore of the game offers just vast hobby and painting flexibility for the mythos surrounding pagan and supernatural creatures. Can you share some of the jewelry that you make that pleases people still into these symbols and these deep-rooted archetypes?
All right, this right here is from an 1890s engraved lodge pin that was presented to somebody. It's on the back of the piece. It has who it was presented to. It had been turned into a pin, so some of that's covered up. A friend caved me from his collection to pull a mold of. Now, this is an antique, so there's no copyright on it and everything. And that's what I'll find. I'll find an antique that I pull a mold of. Then I also create original designs. This is my original Wicker Man. This one's in sterling silver and is, your Wicker Man. And if you look closely inside, there's a little sacrifice. Just, to keep things real. As is this little cauldron right here. Everybody has a cauldron, likes a cauldron around. This one has the phases of the moons on it, and that's an original design. I can also take these pieces, and here, this one's a bronze one. Here's a bronze one that I have modified. I've added a setting to it, and it holds a gray moonstone. So, this one is from a 19th century, late 19th century French button. The French had really cool buttons in the Art Nouveau period. This is the Green Man. And you can see his beard is made out of leaves if you see it, if you can see it close enough there. And the Green Man is a motif that is all over Europe. You can go into cathedrals and places and see some of the carvings, and you'll see the Green Man, forest god there, in depictions of all sorts of the things. And here is Kyrinos, the stag. And this one is from an antique German hunting emblem. And you have the stag skull on a field of oak leaves with some little acorns at the bottom. And I've added the little crescent moon to it. And on this one, rather than the crescent moon, it has a nice large garnet. And these are about the size of an American silver dollar, if anybody can remember what a real American silver dollar looks like. And here we have my favorite, as you can see while I'm wearing a ring there. This is Pan, as you know, I like to call him the original party animal. And he's sitting there playing his pipes. This was again from an antique button, but the button was large, and so it's kind of plain there. So I take it and have modified it by adding a nice little braided edge. And this little fellow, hard to see, but it's small. This is Krampus. And this came from an old buckle somebody gave me that had him in the center. Now, one of the things that I'm able to do over the years, because I deal with antique pieces, is they tend to get worn, especially if they were in soft metal, and you lose detail. So I can take, sometimes I will take the original and I will add detail, build detail back up using, you know, various materials before I pull the mold, and then I can take that one and add even more details, so it brings it back to its original glory before I actually make the piece to bring to sell to the public. This one is a little more esoteric, but I love Japanese art there. This is an onai, a Japanese demon, and this one was a celluloid toggle that was fitted like on a netski, or it's a netski that was fitted on a little Japanese box to keep it from being pulled through the sash and stuff. But I always liked this guy. It's this nice little demon, little horns and stuff there. So
I've always liked the onai representations. They're very they have a lot of character to them. They're very detailed, and you can almost hear the snarl coming out of the beast. That's a really interesting piece there.
And what's really fun about this game is the hobby potential with the mythology and the folklore and the old gods returning once the Daggerland rises to the surface. You can model or hobby any type of metaphysical creature or cryptid or legend that you want. There's even a Krampus miniature that you can get to represent some of the to represent one of the manifestations. So, my question for you, Bob, is which of these symbols, if any, would possibly have been actually worn by soldiers, even discreetly, during World War I? Any of them?
I would say, you know, the pin right here. I mean, that was a hand-tooled star, and the particular one that I pulled the mold off of was for a lodge, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't worn. You know, that they did not make others that were worn.
Well, the war was so vast and covered so much territory all across Europe and Eastern Europe, right up to the edges of Russia, into the Crimean and the Baltic and everything, the whole area. So much mythology could be drawn upon from so many different backgrounds, so many different areas.
Yeah.
You have things like Krampus and paganism and so forth, but then you also have the Oriental influences from like Turkey and from those areas where you could bring in those kinds of influences too. So the potential is just magnificent. There's all kinds of things that you could do with it, and I think that's a large part of the appeal.
I forgot, and I should have. I looked at them and I didn't. I also do some bat squid and winged squid and various creatures there that are sort of an offshoot of some of my steampunk jewelry.
Yes, and a bit of a Lovecraftian Cthulhu element. Yeah,
yes.
Which I'm also seeing on our Facebook group for the War Transformed, seeing people throwing that kind of twist in with their creatures and their manifestations, because every army has a witch, and they have astrological symbols attributed to the leader of the troops. And they even choose between the Horn God or the Maiden Mother and Crone to be loyal to. So it's quite appropriate to what you brought today, for sure. Mr. Spicker, thank you for sharing your fantastic collection and work, and thanks for watching, everyone. If you like the pendants and the jewelry, we've included a link to his Etsy site, The Dragon's Treasure. They have thousands of sales, and they ship worldwide.
As a reminder, folks that are have watched this video, all the items that you saw here, the grenades and munitions and such, were properly deactivated and safed, so they're completely inert. They're no more dangerous than a thrown rock. The weapons, the firearms, of course, are live firearms. They were unloaded, handled appropriately and safely. So, on that safety note, we would love it if you folks would go ahead and give us a like and subscribe down below. It helps us a lot. Thank you so much. We hope you enjoyed that. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.